All right, so I'm just going to ask you to introduce yourself and kind of explain your role with the Canadian Armed Forces.
Well, my name's Céline, and I joined the Canadian Forces on a whim. I joined the reserves when I was in university. I was looking for a summer job. I was in between years 2 and 3 at the University of Regina, and I was having trouble finding work. And a friend suggested that we join the reserves, and I said, "Are you crazy?" It had never crossed my mind. But the most employment I had gained up to that point was 3 days making mini donuts at the Agribition. That
Right.
wasn't going to cut it for
Yeah.
textbooks the following September. So I went down to the recruiting office with her, and somehow we both got signed up. And I lasted the whole summer, and she quit in the first week. She left for personal reasons, and I stuck it out and then ended up spending 4 years as an administrative clerk. Now they call it a resource management support clerk, but I was a clerk managing administration for the soldiers and officers at the Royal Regina Rifles.
Great. And then I'll also get you to introduce your spouse and his role in the military as well.
Well, I joined the Regina Rifles in the summer of 1996, and that same summer, my future husband, Michael, also joined. So we knew each other as new privates, and many, many years later, we got married. By the time we got married, he had spent 10 years in the reserves and then had transferred to the regular force. So he's a regular force soldier. He has worked his way all the way up to Master Warrant Officer. It's his recent promotion, and he's currently working as a Company Sergeant Major at the Canadian Forces Leadership and Recruit School in Saint-Jean-sur-Richelieu. So we were posted here last year.
From my understanding, Michael has served on a few tours. So could you just kind of tell me how he told you that he was going overseas and if there were kind of any conversations that stood out?
Well, the first times that he went overseas was as a reservist, and we weren't dating. And he went to Bosnia a few times, so we didn't have big conversations, and we were young anyway.
Right.
It hits differently when you're older, I think. I guess it just depends where you are in life and with your relationships. And so we were dating when he went to Afghanistan, and I don't remember him specifically telling me that he was going to Afghanistan. But by the time he was going, the war in Afghanistan had been going on for a few years, and it was scary. I'd already known some of the soldiers who had died on that tour, and or not on that tour, sorry, in that war.
Yeah.
And like most Canadians, those images were really fresh in my mind, and I was obviously scared for him.
Hmm.
Um, and it just, even in that, while he was doing the workup training, sorry, I'm trying to find my thoughts.
Yeah.
While he was doing the workup training, people that he knew died, so there was no escaping that reality that you are going somewhere dangerous, and I'd never lived this before, and his family was extremely worried, and I mean, we were still kind of getting to know each other. It was very early still in our relationship, so I became very close to his sisters in particular in
Okay.
that time. They were probably the biggest support system to me. I was new in Edmonton at the time too. I had my work colleagues, but I really didn't have a strong support network at that time, and so it was a really intense lead up to him leaving, and then that time when he was away is probably one of the most intense periods of stress of my life.
So kind of leading into that as well, when he was overseas, were you able to stay in contact with him and kind of how did that look?
When you think of soldiers and their families from the First and the Second World Wars, all they could rely on was letters.
Right.
And we had the advantage of being able to keep in contact through email and he would be able to phone me sometimes through sat phone. And so when it came to email, I would sit down at the end of my day and just tell him about my day and just write a message from home. And by the time I woke up in the morning, the time zone difference worked out that by the time I woke up in the morning, I was usually waking up to a message from him. So I'd start my day hearing from him, and it was we developed a routine, and that was really nice. It was great to be able to have such constant communication. And I honestly preferred receiving emails from him, because the first time that he called me, he was at a forward operating base in Afghanistan, which all I know is that meant that he wasn't in the, the relative safety of Kandahar, the airfield.
Mm-hmm.
But the first time he phoned me from the satellite phone, I was at work. I was not expecting the phone call, and it was great to hear him. And all of a sudden I could hear shooting in the background, and something was happening, and suddenly he had to go. And I don't know if that was like rocket fire or what. I don't know I certainly didn't know then what was happening. And the conversation cut short, and I didn't know what to do. Like, whatever is happening, whatever just caused this conversation to end is still going on.
Right.
In real time. And it was very scary. And I was really actually lucky that I was at work when he called, because I had at least the colleagues around me. There was distraction and positivity, and just right. I had people to help me through that.
Yeah.
During that tour, I actually changed jobs and ended up taking an opportunity that had me working from home.
Okay.
And I had no foresight that would be the worst thing I could do for my mental health during Mike's tour. Because I was a news junkie at the time too, I would have the news on 24/7. I was
right.
working in my living room, and I had the TV on, and I used to work in journalism. I'd always been really interested in the news. It was just what I did, have the news on.
Definitely.
And the times that, because on that tour, Mike did lose friends. And those times when the news came on that another soldier has died, I just, froze in fear. I didn't know if it was Mike, but I knew that it probably wouldn't be Mike, because they don't usually announce things on the news until the family has been notified. So, okay, this isn't me, but still, are there injuries? They don't report on those. And I would find myself in a kind of a state of paralysis. What I know now might, the flight fright, but I was frozen, and I would be kind of in a state of almost paralysis. It made it very difficult to fight through and work, continue my work and keep my thoughts straight. And with, looking back, it was terrible for my mental health. I had convinced myself at some point, I kind of did these calculations, irrational calculations, that based on time zones, based on patterns that I thought I was noticing on the news, that if I could stay up until 3:00 in the morning, then that would probably mean that he was okay for that day. That I convinced myself that there would be this window that families would be notified, and then the time that I knew from working in journalism that you would have to assemble a story and then hit the news, that if I could just make it till 3:00 in the morning, it probably meant that he was safe for another day.
Wow.
And then one night I finally let myself go to sleep. It was after 3:00 in the morning, and I woke up to a buzzer. We lived in an apartment at the time, and I could see out the window that there were two dark figures at the front of our building, buzzing, and it was ringing at my apartment. And I got so scared that this was, the call that nobody wants, the visit at the door, that it was my time to receive this terrible news and to become, part of the widow club, And so I answered, like, my voice shaking and everything, hello. These guys had lost their keys and were locked out of the apartment and wanted into the building, and I just, the heart attack,
Yeah.
I'm so angry and so frustrated, and I mean, eventually relieved, I guess, but that wasn't the first feeling. And so looking back, it was just an incredibly intense time emotionally, and my mental health really suffered. And Mike didn't go back to Afghanistan after that tour. He didn't have an opportunity to go on another tour, so I don't know how I would do things differently in that sense. Circumstances dictate that it would be different. I have kids now, and different coping methods. I think that experience would force change and force me to find more supports before I ended up in that kind of a situation again.
Yeah. So my next question is, how do you think your family's time in the military has affected you the most?
I always think that I have a little bit of an advantage in that I know a little bit about how the military works. Those 4 years in the reserves that long ago probably isn't indicative of what Mike lives on his day-to-day at his current job. Things have changed for sure, and I don't have the big overall picture, but I do have enough of a sense that I kind of understand the culture, and I think that it helps me imagine what he's doing when he's in the field. I know what that looks like. I've been in the field. I know the challenges, and I know that it can be fun. It can be enjoyable. So when he talks about the rank structure, it's not completely foreign to me. So compared to somebody who's new in a relationship with a soldier, I think I have a little bit of an advantage of understanding how it's affected me personally over the years. War or deployments are just a small part of a military member's life and the family, and it's things that happen at home that are kind of unique. Like, there's danger in all kinds of jobs. There are Canadians every day doing dangerous things. So when we think about combat and that fear part of it, that's really a small part of it. It's the challenges of moving frequently and leaving your support network behind, and your family. We are at the other end of the country now from where our families are, and that's really hard, especially right now when things are so expensive and flights feel like a luxury when family is a necessity. That's challenging, and at each posting you're not the same person. You've had different experiences. Our last posting, we arrived with 2 6-year-olds. This posting last year, when we arrived here, we arrived with 2 11-year-olds. So even their life experience is different, and how they adapt to that change is different. So each posting is unique in its own way, even though you have moved before. Leaving behind your place in line for a family doctor, and having to start at zero. Specialists, the same thing. It's challenging. And then for me, as I started saying, for me personally too, it's the challenge of employment and having to reinvent yourself every time. Not everybody can find a job in their field in every new place. So it's a common challenge for spouses. And right now I'm working a job that I love. It's just such a rewarding position. And I know that I'll probably be leaving it in a few years, and that's already heartbreaking to me. Right. And I feel also lucky that my boss hired me. I kept it out of the interview that I was a military spouse because I didn't want that to count against me. Right. And I know that she was disappointed when she heard that there's a possibility that we'll be moving in a few years. But I also know that I might not have gotten the job if I'd even said it at all. So I would have cheated myself out of this amazing experience that I'm having. So that's a challenge that not everybody has to live with.
We kind of just talked about how it's affected you personally. How would you say it's affected your family as a whole?
Well, I talked about the impact on my children.
Yes, you did.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, transitioning to a new province. We're in Quebec now. I'm so glad that my kids have been learning French since day one. It's been a culture shock, but not as big of a culture shock as it could have been. So that's my immediate family, but our extended family, our parents are aging. Um, in my family, there have been health issues that we've not been able to support our family members concretely, like being there, and we also haven't been able to spend quality time with them that we would have otherwise. So that's really hard.
Yeah,
That's and then just the time, like my parents and Mike's parents with their grandkids, and the kids with their cousins. There's just a sense of family that we are outside of, and that we really have no control over. Um, and yeah,
yeah,
moving, having to go from one job, or not job market, but housing market, going
yeah,
from Manitoba where houses are quite affordable
right.
to Saint Jean where they're a lot more expensive. That has impacts on families, and some families have not been as lucky as we have. And there is definitely a housing crisis within the military that I don't think is talked about as much as it should be, or even known as
Right.
much as it could be.
So, is there anything that you wish civilians understood about the military?
So I've talked a lot about the challenges of being a military family. I think that we're kind of, in a sense, hidden. Like you hear about the families around November 11th, and I'm certainly not looking for attention. Like, I'm not advocating for anything. And in so many ways, our military families are no different from other Canadian families. It's not that we're special. But when you think about Afghanistan, and I noticed this a lot in myself when we lived in Shiloh, Manitoba, base town, that lost close to 30 soldiers, I think, during the Afghan war. And just knowing that even though that had happened so many years ago, the people who knew those soldiers and who knew the families who lost loved ones, they still walk among us, you know?
Yeah.
The librarian remembers the kids who lost their dad. The teachers remember teaching those kids. And like it's a community that is really touched by every single one of those losses. And it's not just limited to that family, it's everybody who knew that family in one way or another. Coaching sports, I mentioned teaching, just seeing them in the neighborhood. And I noticed that in Edmonton too, even though we didn't live close to the base, and my job at the time had really nothing to do with veterans or the military. As soon as the topic came up, somebody had a connection in one way or another to a family that had been devastated. So I just think that it's important to realize that even though the war is far away and we don't talk about it every day, that feeling of loss is still with so many more Canadians than you would even recognize.
Yeah.
And it's something that a lot more of us have in common than we think about regularly.
So, is there anything else you'd like to share about your family's time in the military to help people understand that war still affects Canadians today?
When I first joined, like I said, it was never something that I had thought about. I joined on a whim, and it turned out to be the best decision I could have made. I think I gained a lot from it. There's a lot of good things that come out of that military experience, and but because it's so different, and because relatively few people think about even joining the military as a career. We get a lot of questions like, why would you ever join the military?
Mhm.
Who would ever join the military, you know? And I think that even though people don't say that out loud to my face anymore, knowing that I'm married to a soldier,
Right.
I think there's still a lot of people that think that. And I can't help but get just a little bit defensive at that notion. Um, People join the military for different reasons, all kinds of reasons. But at the end of the day, Canada's military is volunteer. It's it's completely dependent on people making those choices to join. And if we didn't have people willing to step up and take on those positions, my answer to the question, why would anybody join, is so that your brother or your son or daughter doesn't have to. Because if we didn't have a volunteer army, we might have to resort to drafting one and
Right.
conscription. And so, yeah, they do it so that you don't have to.